How could you do this after everything?
I didn't mean for it to happen. Please, you have to believe me.
It's elegant even, but it felt like a costume for a role she'd never auditioned for. Her father's restaurant, the small Italian place where she had spent every summer since childhood, was drowning in debt. The medical bills from her mother's illness had piled up faster than anyone could manage. And then, Julian Westbrook's family had appeared with an offer that sounded more like a business transaction than a marriage proposal. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the simple veil. Sophie had always imagined her wedding day differently. She had dreamed of marrying someone who looked at her the way her father looked at her mother, even after 30 years together. Someone who knew her favorite book, who understood why she cried during sunset, who actually wanted to know her. Instead, she was about to marry a man she had met exactly twice. Both times in conference rooms surrounded by lawyers, the door opened and her best friend Rachel entered. Her expression a mixture of concern and forced cheerfulness. "Sophie, you look beautiful." Rachel's voice wavered slightly as she spoke. Sophie turned away from the mirror. "Do you think I am making a mistake?" Rachel took her hands, squeezing gently. "I think you are saving your family. That takes incredible courage. And who knows, maybe Julian will surprise you." Sophie wanted to believe that. But the memory of their last meeting haunted her. Julian had barely looked up from his phone during the entire prenuptial agreement signing. He had treated the whole thing like another real estate deal, initialing pages without emotion, asking his lawyer questions about property division and asset protection. When Sophie had tried to start a conversation about their future living arrangements, he had simply said his assistant would handle the details. The wedding. The ceremony took place in an exclusive hotel ballroom in Manhattan. Everything was perfect in that calculated, expensive way that money could buy. White roses everywhere, a string quartet playing classical music, guests dressed in designer clothes. But there was no warmth, no joy, nothing that felt remotely like a celebration of love. Julian stood at the altar in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his dark hair styled impeccably, his expression neutral. He was undeniably handsome with sharp features, intense gray eyes, and the kind of presence that commanded attention. But when Sophie walked down the aisle, he barely registered any emotion. His eyes met hers briefly before he glanced at his watch. The officiant began speaking. But Sophie heard the words as if from underwater. She was acutely aware of the cameras, the guests, the performance they were putting on. When it came time for vows, they recited the traditional words without adding anything personal. Julian's voice was steady and professional, like he was closing a business deal. "Do you, Julian Westbrook, take Sophie Bennett to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." His response was quick, efficient. When it was her turn, Sophie's voice caught for just a moment. "I do." The kiss was perfunctory, a brief brush of lips that lasted barely 2 seconds. No lingering, no tenderness, nothing that suggested this was the beginning of a life together. The guests applauded politely. Julian immediately turned to shake hands with his business associates while Sophie stood alone. Feeling more isolated than she had ever felt in her life, the first weeks they moved into Julian's penthouse apartment, a stunning space on the Upper East Side with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. The apartment was all clean lines, expensive furniture, and carefully curated art pieces. It was beautiful, but sterile. It's like a hotel room rather than a home. Julian gave her a brief tour that first night, showing her the guest bedroom where she would stay. "Your room has its own bathroom and walk-in closet. My assistant stocked it with everything you should need. If you require anything else, just let her know." Sophie stared at him. "We are not sharing a bedroom?" Julian loosened his tie, not meeting her eyes. "I think separate spaces are more practical. We both value our privacy." He disappeared into his home office after that. Sophie heard him on conference calls until well past midnight. She sat alone in the unfamiliar bedroom, surrounded by luxury but feeling poorer than she ever had growing up in her family's small apartment above the restaurant. The pattern continued for weeks. Julian left before she woke up, came home after she had eaten dinner alone, and spent evenings locked in his office. On weekends, he worked or attended business functions by himself. When they did cross paths, their conversations were painfully brief. "Good morning, morning. Did you sleep well?" "Fine." Sophie tried everything. She cooked his favorite meals, learned from his housekeeper what he liked. She left notes asking about his day. She suggested they have dinner together, watch a movie, take a walk. Every attempt was met with polite deflection or complete dismissal. I have a meeting too. Much work tonight. Maybe another time. One evening, Sophie found herself standing in the living room, looking out at the glittering city lights, tears streaming down her face. She had given up everything for this marriage. Her freedom, her dreams of falling in love naturally, her vision of what life could be. And for what? To be invisible in her own home? Rachel visited whenever she could, bringing warmth and laughter into the cold apartment. But even Rachel's optimism was fading. He has not even tried to get to know you, Rachel asked one afternoon, incredulous. Sophie, this is not right. You deserve so much better than this. I made a commitment, Sophie said quietly. My family is safe now. The restaurant is saved. My mother's medical bills are paid. That was the point. But what about your happiness? Rachel's eyes filled with concern. What about building an actual life? Sophie had no answer to that. She had signed a contract for 3 years. 3 years of this cold, empty existence before they could quietly divorce and go their separate ways. Some nights, lying alone in that guest bedroom, 3 years felt like a lifetime. She began filling her days with purpose. She volunteered at a local community center, teaching art classes to children. She explored the city, visiting museums and galleries, finding beauty where she could. She read books, painted in the small studio space Julian's assistant had grudgingly cleared for her, and tried to build a life that did not revolve around waiting for her husband to notice she existed. But at night, when she heard Julian moving around the apartment, taking business calls, living his life as if she were not there, the loneliness hit hardest. Sophie had saved her family from financial ruin, but the cost was becoming clearer every day. She had traded her heart for their security, and Julian Westbrook was making absolutely certain she knew that her heart was not part of their agreement. What Sophie did not know, what she could not see, was that everything was about to change. A single, overheard conversation would shift Julian's entire understanding of who she was and what he had been refusing to acknowledge. But that revelation was still days away, and for now, Sophie Bennett remained invisible in her own marriage. 3 months into their marriage, Sophie was arranging flowers in the penthouse when the doorbell rang. She opened it to find a stunning woman in her late 20s, with the same gray eyes as Julian, but a warmth in her expression that he never showed. You must be Sophie. I am Diana, Julian's sister. She swept into the apartment without waiting for an invitation, carrying shopping bags and radiating energy. I have been dying to meet you, but my brother has been keeping you hidden away like some kind of secret. Sophie managed to smile, caught off guard by Diana's directness. It is nice to meet you too. Julian did not mention you were coming. Diana laughed, a bright sound that seemed foreign in the quiet apartment. Julian never mentions anything personal. That man treats human relationships like spreadsheets. She dropped her bags and turned to study Sophie with open curiosity. But enough about him. Tell me about you. How are you surviving marriage to the Ice King? Over the next hour, Sophie found herself relaxing for the first time in months. Diana was funny, warm, and refreshingly honest. They drank coffee and talked about art, books, and life. Diana shared stories about growing up with Julian, painting a picture of a boy who had once been open and playful before their parents' bitter divorce had turned him cold and cynical about love. He built walls after that. Oh, yes. Diana explained. Decided that emotions were weaknesses, and that controlling everything was the only way to avoid getting hurt. Our father cheated, our mother became bitter, and Julian concluded that marriage should be a business arrangement. Nothing more. Sophie felt a pang of understanding mixed with sadness. That explains a lot. Diana reached across and squeezed her hand. Give him time. I see how he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching. There is something there, even if he refuses to acknowledge it. The following week, Julian came home early for once, intending to grab documents from his study. As he approached the living room, he heard voices. Diana had returned for another visit, and he paused in the hallway, not wanting to interrupt. But then he heard his name. Has Julian even tried to connect with you? Diana was asking. Really tried? Sophie's voice was quiet when she answered. No, we live like strangers. Separate bedrooms, separate lives. He barely speaks to me except about household logistics, that stubborn fool. Diana's frustration was evident. Sophie, can I ask you something personal? Have you ever been in a serious relationship before? There was a long pause. No, Sophie finally said. I dated a little in college, but nothing serious. I always thought I would wait until I found someone real, someone I could build a life with. Her voice grew softer. I never even kissed anyone until the wedding. I wanted my first everything to mean something. Julian felt like he had been punched in the stomach. He stood frozen in the hallway, his briefcase suddenly heavy in his hand. You mean you have never? Diana's voice was gentle. Sophie, are you saying you are still a virgin? Yes. Sophie's voice was barely audible now. I know it sounds old-fashioned, but I always imagined my wedding night would be special. With someone who actually wanted me, who chose me because they loved me, not because of a contract. Instead, I got a guest bedroom and a husband who acts like I am invisible. Oh, Sophie. Diana's voice was full of compassion. Julian is an idiot. A complete idiot. Julian slowly backed away, his mind reeling. He made it to his study and closed the door, sitting heavily in his leather chair. For 3 months, he had treated Sophie like an inconvenience, necessary addition to satisfy his grandfather's demands for the company merger. He had deliberately kept his distance, determined not to let this arranged. Marriage interfered with his carefully controlled life. But hearing her voice crack with loneliness, learning that she had given up so much more than he realized, that every day of his cold indifference had been chipping away at someone who had entered this marriage with innocence and hope, it shattered something inside him. He thought about the meals she had cooked that he had skipped, the notes she had left that he had barely read, the times she had tried to start conversations and he had shut her down. She had not asked for this marriage any more than he had, but she had been trying to make it work while he had been actively making her miserable. Julian pulled up the security footage from the living room camera, something he rarely checked. He watched footage from the past weeks, seeing Sophie in moments when she thought she was alone. He saw her crying quietly on the balcony. He saw her staring at her phone, probably looking at photos of her family and friends. He saw her painting in the small studio, her face filled with a sadness that made his chest ache. What had he done? First real attempts the next morning, Sophie woke to find Julian in the kitchen, attempting to make breakfast. He had clearly never done this before. There was flour on the counter, eggshells in the pancake batter, and the smoke alarm had gone off at least once based on the open windows. He looked up when she entered, and for the first time, she saw something other than indifference in his eyes. Uncertainty? Maybe. Or the beginning of shame. Good morning, he said, his voice different than usual, less distant. I was trying to make pancakes, but I think I am failing spectacularly. Sophie stared at him, confused by this sudden change. Do you need help? Please. He stepped aside, and for the first time since their wedding, they stood side by side doing something together. Julian followed her instructions, and she tried not to notice how hyper-aware she was of his presence, the warmth of him next to her, the sandalwood scent of his cologne. When they finally sat down with salvageable pancakes, Julian cleared his throat. Sophie, I owe you an apology. A massive one. I have been treating you terribly, and there is no excuse for that. She looked up, surprised. What changed? Julian met her eyes. I realized I've been seeing you as an obligation instead of a person. That was wrong. You deserve better, and I want to try to give you that. If you will let me. Sophie's heart beat faster, but she was cautious. Years of loneliness could not be erased by one breakfast. What exactly are you saying? I am saying I want to start over. Really get to know you. Build something real here, even if it started artificially. He reached across the table, his hand hovering near hers. I cannot promise I will be good at this. Relationships are not my strength. But I want to try. Slow progress. The changes were gradual, but noticeable. Julian started coming home for dinner. He asked about her day and actually listened to the answers. He learned that she loved impressionist art, that she volunteered teaching underprivileged kids, that her favorite time of day was early morning when the city was just waking up. One evening, he surprised her with tickets to an art exhibition she had mentioned wanting to see. They walked through the gallery together, and Julian found himself captivated, not by the paintings, but by Sophie's face, as she explained what she loved about each piece. Her eyes lit up when she talked about art, and he realized he had never noticed how beautiful she was when she was happy. They started taking walks through Central Park. They cooked together, with Sophie teaching him basic skills and laughing when he inevitably made a mess. They watched movies on the couch, and one night, Julian fell asleep during the film and woke to find his head had dropped onto Sophie's shoulder. She had not moved, just sat there letting him rest. Diana noticed the change immediately on her next visit. She pulled Julian aside with a knowing smile. "You finally figured it out." Julian ran a hand through his hair, looking more vulnerable than his sister had seen him in years. "I have been such a fool, Diana. I wasted 3 months being cold to someone who never deserved it. So make up for it now," Diana said simply. "Show her who you can be when you are not hiding behind walls." The gala 2 weeks later. Julian's company was hosting a charity gala. In the past, he would have gone alone, but this time, he turned to Sophie. "Will you come with me? As my actual wife, not just for appearances." Sophie hesitated, remembering every social event where she had felt like an accessory. "What is different this time?" "Everything," Julian said firmly. "I want you there with me. I want everyone to know you are my wife, and that I am proud of that," the night of the gala. Sophie wore a deep emerald dress that Diana had helped her pick out. When she came down the stairs, Julian stopped mid-conversation with his assistant and just stared. The look on his face made Sophie's breath catch. "You look breathtaking," he said, offering his arm. She took it, feeling the solid warmth of him. And something shifted between them. At the gala, Julian stayed by her side the entire evening. He introduced her to everyone, his hand resting protectively on the small of her back. When a business associate made a dismissive comment about art teachers, Julian's voice turned cold. "My wife is incredibly talented and does more good in 1 week of teaching than most people do in a lifetime. I would appreciate it if you showed her the respect she deserves." Sophie's heart swelled. No one had ever defended her like that. Later, when the band started playing, Julian turned to her. "Dance with me?" On the dance floor, he pulled her close, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers. They moved together easily. Sophie was acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched. "Thank you," she whispered. "For tonight? For trying." Julian looked down at her, his gray eyes intense. "Sophie, I need you to know something. This is not just trying anymore. Somewhere in the past few weeks, this became real for me. You became real for me." Her breath caught. "Julian, what are you saying?" "I am saying that I am falling for you. I know I have given you no reason to believe me, and I know I need to earn your trust. But I need you to know that this matters to me now. You matter to me." The power outage, they returned to the penthouse that night, the air between them charged with new tension. Sophie was changing out of her dress when the lights suddenly went out. A blackout had hit their section of the city. She heard Julian's voice from the hallway. "Sophie, are you okay?" "I am fine," she called back, making her way carefully through the dark bedroom. She opened the door to find Julian standing there with his phone flashlight. Still in his dress shirt with the tie loosened. "Looks like we are without power for a while," he said. "Want to sit on the balcony? The stars are actually visible tonight." They settled on the outdoor couch. The city spread out below them in unusual darkness. Julian had grabbed a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. They talked for hours, sharing stories they had never told each other before. Sophie told him about her mother's illness, about the fear of losing the restaurant, about her dreams of opening her own art school someday. Julian opened up about his parents' divorce, about the pressure of running the company, about how he had confused control with protection. "I thought if I'd never let anyone in, I could never be hurt," Julian admitted. "But all I did was hurt someone who never deserved it. You walked into this marriage with more courage than I have ever had, Sophie. You were willing to be vulnerable even when I gave you nothing in return." Sophie felt tears prick her eyes. "I was so lonely, Julian. Every day in that guest bedroom, feeling like I had made the worst mistake of my life." Julian set down his wine glass and turned to face her fully. "You are not sleeping in that guest bedroom anymore. Not because I expect anything, but because I want you close. I want to fall asleep knowing you are there, and wake up seeing your face. If you want that too. Sophie's heart pounded. I want that. Julian reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. Can I kiss you? Really kiss you this time, not like at the wedding. Yes, she breathed. The kiss started gentle, Julian treating her like something precious. But when Sophie's hands moved to his hair, pulling him closer, something ignited between them. The kiss deepened, became hungry, full of 3 months of tension and 2 weeks of growing connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Julian rested his forehead against hers. Come to bed with me, he whispered. Just to sleep. Just to be close. We will take everything else at whatever pace you need. Sophie nodded, and Julian stood, taking her hand and leading her through the dark apartment. They fell asleep that night, tangled together, and for the first time since her wedding day. Sophie felt like she might actually have found her home. Sophie woke slowly, awareness returning in gentle waves. The first thing she noticed was warmth, the solid presence of someone next to her. Julian's arm was draped across her waist, his breathing deep and even against her neck. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting golden patterns across the bed they now shared. She stayed still, not wanting to break the moment, hardly believing this was real. For months, she had slept alone in that guest bedroom, wondering if she would ever feel connected to the man she had married. Now, waking up in his arms felt like stepping into a dream she had stopped allowing herself to have. Julian stirred behind her, his arm tightening slightly before he seemed to wake fully. Good morning! His voice was rough with sleep, sending shivers down her spine. Good morning, Sophie whispered back. He pressed a kiss to her shoulder, a gesture so tender it made her heart ache. How did you sleep? Better than I have in months. She turned in his arms to face him, finding his gray eyes already focused on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. What about you? Best sleep of my life, Julian admitted. He reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. Sophie, I know we have a lot to figure out, but I want you to know that last night, falling asleep with you, that felt more right than anything has in years. Before she could respond, his phone buzzed insistently on the nightstand. Julian glanced at it and groaned. I have a meeting in an hour. But he made no move to get up, instead pulling her closer. They can wait. Sophie laughed softly. The great Julian Westbrook? Putting off work? Who are you, and what have you done with my husband? Your husband, he repeated, a smile playing at his lips. I like hearing you say that. He kissed her forehead, then her nose, then hovered near her lips. I really like it. The kiss that followed was slow and sweet, full of promise. When they finally separated, Julian sighed reluctantly. I really do have to go, but tonight, let me take you somewhere special. Just us. Opening up true to his word, Julian came home that evening at a reasonable hour, something that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. He found Sophie in her studio working on a painting of the park at sunrise. He stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching her work. The way she bit her lip in concentration, the paint smudges on her fingers. That is beautiful, he said, making her jump slightly. You startled me. She turned, her face lighting up when she saw him. You are home early. I told my assistant to clear my evenings from now on. Family time is non-negotiable. He crossed to her, looking at the canvas. You are incredibly talented, Sophie. Have you ever thought about having your own exhibition? Sophie set down her brush, wiping her hands on a rag. I used to dream about it, but it always seemed unrealistic. Getting gallery space in New York costs money I never had. Julian's mind was already working. What if I told you I know several gallery owners who owe me favors? Would you let me help make that dream happen? Sophie hesitated. I do not want handouts, Julian. It would not be a handout. Your work is genuinely good. I would just be opening doors. You would have to walk through them yourself. He took her paint-stained hands in his. Let me support your dreams, Sophie. Not because I have to, but because I want to see you shine. Tears welled in her eyes. No one has ever believed in me like this. And they were fools. He pulled her close, and she rested her head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart. Get cleaned up. We have reservations. The rooftop dinner. Julian took her to an exclusive rooftop restaurant with a view of the entire city's skyline. They sat at a private table under strings of lights, the spring breeze carrying the scent of blooming flowers from the rooftop garden. Over dinner, they talked about everything. Julian shared more about the pressure he felt running the family company, about his fear of failing his grandfather who had built the business from nothing. Sophie told him about her mother's recovery, how the weight of medical debt had lifted because of their marriage, how grateful she was, even though she had been so unhappy. "I need to meet your family properly," Julian said suddenly. "Not at some formal event, but really meet them. I want to know the people who raised you." Sophie's eyes widened. "Really? You want that?" "Of course, they are your family, which makes them my family now." He reached across the table, taking her hand. "I have been thinking about something else too. The 3-year contract we signed, I want to void it." Sophie's heart stopped. "You want to end this?" "No," Julian said quickly, squeezing her hand. "The opposite. I do not want an expiration date on us anymore. I want to build a real marriage, not one bound by a contract with an endpoint. I want forever, Sophie, if you will have me." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I want that too." Julian stood and moved to her side of the table, kneeling beside her chair. He pulled out a small box, opening it to reveal a stunning ring, nothing like the simple band from their contract wedding. "This is what I should have given you the first time. Not as part of a business deal, but as a promise. Sophie Bennett Westbrook, will you marry me again? For real this time, with love and choice and everything I should have given you from the beginning?" Sophie nodded, unable to speak through her tears. Julian slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her up into his arms, kissing her deeply while the other diners applauded. The real wedding 3 weeks later. They stood in a small chapel in the Hamptons, surrounded only by close family and friends. Diana served as maid of honor, beaming with satisfaction at having been right about her brother. Sophie's parents sat in the front row, her mother crying happy tears. Her father looking proud and relieved that his daughter had found real love after all. Sophie wore a flowing white dress, simple but elegant, with wildflowers in her hair. Julian could not take his eyes off her as she walked down the aisle, this time with her father by her side. When they reached him, Sophie's father shook Julian's hand firmly. "Take care of my girl," he said gruffly. "For real this time, I promise," Julian replied, meaning it with every fiber of his being. The ceremony was everything their first wedding had not been. Personal, warm, filled with emotion. When it came time for vows, Julian spoke from the heart. "Sophie, 3 months ago I married you thinking it was just a business arrangement. I was wrong about everything. You walked into my life and refused to let my walls stand. You showed me that being vulnerable is not weakness. It is the bravest thing a person can do. You taught me how to feel again, how to hope again, how to love. I promise to spend the rest of my life making up for those first cold months. I promise to always see you, to always choose you, to build the life together that we both deserve." Sophie's voice shook as she responded. "Julian, I married you out of duty, but I am marrying you today out of choice. You have shown me that people can change, that walls can come down, that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings lead to the most beautiful stories. I promise to stand by you, to support your dreams as you support mine, to be your partner in everything. I choose you today and every day for the rest of our lives." The kiss they shared was deep and passionate. And this time, when they turned to face their guests, they were both glowing with genuine happiness. The wedding night they spent their second honeymoon at a private beach house. Just the two of them and the sound of waves. That first night, as they stood on the balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Julian pulled Sophie close. "Are you nervous?" he asked softly, knowing this was new territory for her. "A little," she admitted, "but I trust you." Julian turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her waist. "We do not have to do anything you are not ready for. There is no rush, no pressure. We have all the time in the world." But Sophie shook her head, reaching up to cup his face. "I am ready, Julian. I want this. I want you. Not because I feel obligated, but because I love you. Because I choose this. I love you too, he breathed, and the words felt like coming home. Then let me show you how much. He led her inside, every touch reverent and careful. Julian took his time, making sure she felt safe and cherished at every moment. He kissed away her nervousness, whispered reassurances against her skin, made her feel like the most precious thing in the world. When they finally came together, it was tender and passionate, a perfect expression of everything they had built between them. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Sophie's head on Julian's chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her back. That was perfect, she whispered. You made it perfect. Julian kissed the top of her head. You are perfect. Thank you for trusting me with this. With all of you, 6 months later, Sophie stood in her very own art gallery, surrounded by her paintings, watching as patrons moved through the space with appreciation and interest. Several pieces had already sold. An art critic from a major publication had praised her work as emotionally evocative and technically masterful. Julian stood across the room, talking with potential buyers, but his eyes kept finding her. Every time their gazes met, he smiled. That private smile he reserved just for her. Diana appeared at Sophie's elbow, grinning. Look at you, successful artist, happily married. I told you he would come around. You did, Sophie laughed. Thank you for not giving up on him. Thank you for not giving up on him either. Diana clinked her champagne glass against Sophie's sparkling water. Wait, why are you not drinking wine? You love wine. Sophie bit her lip, trying to hide her smile. Can you keep a secret until tonight? I have not told Julian yet. Diana's eyes widened. Oh my God, are you pregnant? Sophie nodded, her hand instinctively moving to her still flat stomach. 10 weeks. I found out yesterday and I want to tell him in a special way. He is going to be thrilled, Diana said, pulling her into a hug. You two are going to be amazing parents. That evening, after the gallery closed and they returned to the penthouse, Sophie led Julian to the balcony where they had shared so many important moments. I have something to tell you, she said, taking his hands in hers. Julian studied her face. Seeing the mixture of nervousness and excitement there, what is it? Sophie pulled out a small wrapped box and handed it to him. Open it. Inside was a tiny pair of baby shoes, with a note that read, Coming next fall? Julian stared at the shoes, then at Sophie, his expression stunned. You are pregnant? We are having a baby, she confirmed. Tears streaming down her face, Julian let out a sound between a laugh and a sob, pulling her into his arms and spinning her around. We are having a baby, he repeated, setting her down gently, suddenly concerned. Sorry, should I not have done that? Are you okay? Sophie laughed through her tears. I am fine, we are fine. I am just so happy, Julian. He knelt down, pressing a kiss to her stomach. Hello in there, little one. I am your dad, and I cannot wait to meet you. He looked up at Sophie, his eyes shining. Thank you. Thank you for this. For us. For giving me a chance when I did not deserve one. 1 year later, Sophie sat in the rocking chair in the nursery, their daughter Emma sleeping peacefully in her arms. The room was painted in soft yellows and greens, with Sophie's paintings of animals and fairy tales on the walls. Through the doorway, she could hear Julian in the kitchen. Humming as he prepared dinner, Emma had been born 6 weeks ago. A healthy baby girl with Julian's gray eyes and Sophie's soft features. Watching Julian become a father had been one of the most beautiful transformations Sophie had ever witnessed. The man who had once been so cold and controlled now melted every time his daughter looked at him. Julian appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a towel. Dinner is almost ready. Want me to take her so you can eat? Sophie nodded, carefully transferring Emma to Julian's arms. He gazed down at their daughter with such pure love that Sophie's heart swelled. I never knew I could feel like this. Julian said softly, like my heart is walking around outside my body. Sophie stood and wrapped her arms around both of them. We built something beautiful, she whispered. Julian kissed her temple. We did. And it all started with a contract neither of us wanted. Funny how life works. Sophie thought back to that first cold wedding, to the lonely months in the guest bedroom, to the moment when everything changed. Their story had not been traditional or easy, but it had led them here, to this moment of perfect contentment. Do you ever regret it? She asked. The arranged marriage? All of it? Julian looked at her seriously. I regret how I treated you at first. But regret marrying you? Never. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Sophie. You and Emma, you are my whole world, as they stood there together. A family forged from an unwanted arrangement that became a powerful love. Sophie knew that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings led to the most extraordinary endings. She had walked into a cold contract and found the warmth of true love. Julian had built walls to protect himself and found that tearing them down led in the light. Their story was proof that love could bloom in the most unlikely places, that people could change, and that sometimes what starts as duty can transform into devotion. Emma stirred in Julian's arms, opening her eyes to look up at her parents. Julian and Sophie exchanged a smile, and in that moment, everything was exactly as it should be. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to click like. Share this story with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more meaningful stories.